Welcome, one and all, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another interview. Now, last night I had the pleasure of sitting down and chatting remotely with the two brothers, Sammy and Don APPAH from the Family Podcast. Now, these two gentlemen are in England, and I followed their Instagram for a while, really enjoyed their styles, their quotes, the things they're doing, and then actually listened to their podcast and said, holy damn, these guys have got some great ideas. I'm really connecting with what they're saying, and wanted to get their opinion on a couple of different topics, which I will go through now. So the first thing we started talking about was role models, and in particular, what's the difference between a role model and just someone you consume, but maybe don't personally take what they're saying to heart. We went over a couple of the role models of the two fellas, Sammy and Don, and also what in particular drew them to that person and how influential it was on their life. Now, we then went on to the topic of racism, which is not something we talk often here on the Mere Mortals, as it just doesn't particularly, I guess, affect our lives super duper much in the moment. And then also, it's just not something where I think we're particularly good at talking about. So sort of leave that topic to the experts. And I feel when I was listening to Sammy and Don that these guys had the most reasonable and rational view I'd heard on the topic. Now, both of them are black and they live in England and from Ghanaian descent. So we had a bit of a discussion about, I guess, where we see the world heading and where we think the world should sort of head, or at least have an idea of what it would look like if the problem of racism was solved, for example. Now, this got us into some interesting areas talking about ideologies and I guess the ability to hold two different thoughts in your head at the same time, which is something you really need to be able to do as a human. Finally, after that, we got onto the topic of family, which you would be able to guess from the Family Podcast. Now, these two guys have a very strong connection, and it was just really interesting getting their thoughts on what is it that drives us to home, for example. What is the call of home, and the family ties and what it means to actually really take care of your family, be involved with your family, and what's so special about the family. So I had a great conversation with them. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys do too. If you want to send them some love, listen to their podcast. It's called The Family Podcast. You can find it everywhere that podcasts are available. And I now bring to you Sammy and Don. Sammy, Don, welcome to the Mere Mortals podcast or interview. We sort of split it up a little bit, so it's not exactly the same thing. I found you guys through Instagram, like we were mentioning just before, and like loving your stuff. And I think just going through a couple of your first episodes and your latest ones, there was a bunch of things where I was like, man, I need to talk to these guys. I got some stuff going on, and I need the help of Sammy and Don. So welcome to the interview.
No, thank you for having us.
No worries, man. No worries. So one of the things that really captured my attention with you guys was, I think it was in like the first two episodes, I came across just a myriad of the ways that I connect with certain people and watch certain people, and you guys were listing off like bam, 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 the same stuff. So Aubrey Marcus, Joe Rogan, Malcolm Gladwell, Jordan Peterson, Socrates, like you're mentioning all these things in the first two episodes. And I was just like, holy shit. Okay, there's a big overlap here. So that got me thinking about role models, and then especially like you talked recently about that Cardi B video, WAP, and I guess like what do you guys see as the difference between like a role model versus someone that you might just consume, but you know it's sort of like entertainment. It's not the same thing.
I think for me personally, it's an affinity with that person. They either go through certain circumstances or they have an aspiration that matches yours. And you feel like by following their trajectory. So you take someone like Jordan Peterson, who's a very academic person. You might say, well, in order to be sensible and try and see the world like Jordan, I'm going to read some of the books that he's had on his dedicated reading list. I might try and study something. You might even get into the same field of study, clinical psychology, because you're motivated by the person you're motivated by the way that this person is to try and replicate. I think we have to be very careful with role models, and this is where the conversation happens, because people can start to live vicariously through the role model. You know, it's like, I have to be this exact same person. And you see it when it goes off on a super deep end, where people are like, I just spent $100,000 or pounds to look like Kim Kardashian, you know, because that's my role model. I think that's where it goes off at the deep end. But at its base core, it's seeing somebody that you aspire to be like.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so strange trying to separate those two sometimes as well, because you know, I found myself, for example, when I used to work in the mines, and I joined this crew, and there was people there who were like all from New Zealand, so they all had the Kiwi accent, and you just naturally start picking it up. I think was it one of your prime ministers who like picked up like a Dutch accent overnight or something like that? I remember there's like this famous story of I think an English politician who did that very similar thing. Like just
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to fact check that. But, yeah. So just speaking of role models, like you already mentioned some, Sammy, but Don, do you have like a list of role models that you have personally like looked up to in your life?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, my list of role models is a weird one, because I tend to think about. I don't think that any person is at a complete stage where they can say that I am the best that I've ever been. Because I think that as long as you have time, you have the potential to be better. And so my role models, I kind of pick elements from, in terms of, and I think that's what stops me from getting into a situation where I feel that I need to be judgmental about a person. Because, for example, I've interfaced or interacted with loads and loads and loads of different people. And I believe that different people have kind of different skills. So me and Sammy are very different in terms of our role models. Sam likes kind of more complete role model, and, you know, he can identify with individual people. But with myself, I identify with traits of good role models. And I'm also someone who, there's kind of a period of time sometimes where I'm like, okay, this person in this element of their life really speaks to me. So I'll try to give an example. I've interacted with a lady who was actually my youth leader for a very long time, and she became one of my role models. It was really interesting. First of all, I grew up in the church, and when I had the conversation with her, it was kind of like I was bad in the church. Like, I was terrible. I was shooting people in the head with BB guns. I was causing fights, and I was supposed to be one of the youth leaders. It was so bad. If you push me in basketball and I miss my shot, you know, we're probably going to get into some sort of scrap. And I always found it weird that she kind of chose me to be a youth leader, because, you know, I had this temperament, which, as you can probably see, has calmed down a lot. I don't start fights anymore. I don't do any of that stuff. But one thing that spoke to me about her was her realness in such an unreal environment. I always felt growing up that the church was one of those places where you kind of put on your Sunday suit and you go, and nobody really knows what's going on in your life, and you're like, oh, praise God. And then you go out and someone talks crazy to you and you punch them in the face, you know, and it's like, well, those two lives are very different lives. Whereas she kind of was just like, well, this is kind of how it is, really. So I remember walking in and, you know, we had a group of maybe like 14 to 16-year-olds, and we used to have this thing called Lasers Extra, where only people who were like 17 to 18 could stay and above could stay. And she basically was like, well, what do you guys think about sex? We're like, huh?
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Yeah. It's a loaded question, and it's also not something that's spoken about in the church for young people. So everyone's just sitting there kind of just watching like, what the hell? And, you know, her honesty in such a place where it's stigmatized to some degree, you know, resonated with me. So she became one of my role models in terms of the way that she was so eloquent, but she was so graceful but truthful about what she wanted to speak about. And so although I wouldn't follow all of her life, because she went from a youth leader to now being a priest. And I don't have any issues with being a priest. I grew up in the church. I believe in God. I don't have any issue with that. But there's certain parts of her life that don't align with me. I grew up around what some people would call trappers, to some degree. A lot of my friends didn't go to uni. A lot of my friends didn't even finish education to some degree. And do I identify with them to some degree? Some of them have the work ethic that most people in businesses don't have. And you're just like, how do you get up every day and force yourself to do this? And to some degree, I can form not necessarily a role model out of them, but I can take aspects of that and know that in terms of a role model, it would be someone who's hardworking, someone who's truthful and honest. And then when I see that in another person, then I can say, okay, well, to some degree, I understand, and I relate to that. So.
Yeah. And that'd be, I guess, like a difficult thing if someone's asking you, what's your role models? And it's like, well, I can't just pick one person. I can pick a time period of a person. Yeah. How about you, Sammy? Anyone like really stand out for you as having like a big impact on your life?
Yes. But they happen in like epochs. So when I was younger, there were some guys in the church, like there was a guy called Winston, and he was like a traditional family man. And he just did what he had to do for his family. And he never lost this, like, I don't ever remember him losing his temper. He was always cordial. But I remember there was a time where like, I tried to shake his hand, yeah. And when you're like a teen, you try and shake someone's hand, but you want to let them know, yeah, I'm the man. So you grip it a bit harder than you're supposed to. And he was like, oh, no problem. I'm just going to crush your hand, little boy. And, and so he like put the pressure on, but his facial expression didn't change. He was just letting me know like, okay, this is where I am and this is where you are. And so that was it. There was no malice. He was just teaching me a quite important lesson of like, know where you are in your progression through life. And so he was one of those people. He was just a very dignified person. And I knew that was something that was something to aspire to, so he was like one of my first influences. And then as I got a bit older and started reading a bit more of the mythological characters. So like Hercules is a big one. Hercules and his 12 labors. I thought that was very, very interesting because he's not a complete person, Hercules. Like he goes through this mad thing where he murders his family. He murders his teacher because he can't control his temper. And so you don't have like a complete person where it's like he gets everything right. And one of the things that was attractive to me is that his commitment to atonement, like his commitment to like putting wrong his past. And I think we can learn things from that. It definitely had an effect on me because, a lot of the time you think I am the person that I was, and that I have to be that person all of the time, all throughout life, and that I'm not able to change. And so it also shows a commitment to changing as well, because it didn't come easy for him. He had to go through all of these tasks. He had to submit to his cousin who was a king, but didn't show any of the attributes of being a king, And so, again, that was something that I learned a lot from. So Hercules featured quite prominently in the stuff that I read and his mythology around that time. I think it maybe 16 to like 18, that type of thing. And then as a young adult, guys like Malcolm X came into the picture. I mean, you hear about these people, but actually like sitting down to read his autobiography and finding out who the man was and listening to a lot of his stuff on YouTube, you kind of get more of a texture of what that person is. So he featured prominently. As you said, rightly, Jordan Peterson came into the fore a couple of years ago. I saw him on Rogan and I was like, why? Because at the time he was going through mass controversy. People were saying like he was a fascist and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, but this is one of the most sensible men I've ever heard speak in a while. And so I kind of went down. At first, it was kind of like to be rebellious, like, oh, these lefties, let me just find out what all the fuss is about.
Yeah.
But I really genuinely became interested in his work and his philosophy. So, and then I don't know if you know, there was a civil activist called James Baldwin.
No, it doesn't spring to mind now.
Yeah, and he's really forgotten. Like when people talk about like the civil rights movement, it's like Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and Dr. King Jr. And there were other people like Nikki Giovanni, and another one is James Baldwin, and he was a writer. He wrote a book called The Fire Next Time. And while I may have some discrepancies with some of his viewpoints, I do think that his power to orate his point of view and some of the stuff he talks about being autonomous, being somebody who really takes accountability for who you are, what you are, and what you do in the world. That resonated deeply. And then I think the final person I'll throw in there is Marcus Aurelius, because his teachings are very, very interesting to me. Yeah. So I know that was a lot long-winded thing.
No, that's good, man. It's always good to see, hear how other people find really interesting and what captures their attention. And then, it's almost like a vicarious way of, I hate to say judging them, but you sort of judge them of what they like. And it's like, if it's sort of similar to you, but maybe have some different stuff, it's like, oh yeah, maybe that's a real good. So like James Baldwin, I just wrote that down, and it's like, you know what, I'm going to give him a look up and, spend a bit of time on that. You mentioned something, Don, as well, which was really interesting of, you're good at like taking just snapshots of like a trait, for example, of what someone's, you enjoy from someone. And I guess almost divorcing that from them as a whole. And one of the things I've been noticing recently is, everyone, especially with just the way internet's going, with the way we're connecting with each other and the way the internet records everything, you're going to find stuff in the past of basically everyone. So everyone's going to have that moment of being called out. Maybe it's not being attacked by the mob, but maybe it's, a friends or family or something see a darker side of you, or a side that you would rather have forgotten and was there in the past. So now that we all have, I guess, like more role models online as well, what do you think is a good like mental way of sort of disconnecting the traits of someone, the things you really like about them, versus the whole person, or even just part of the person in the past?
So I think generally each person, as you said, will have kind of this streak within their life where they may not have known who they are, or they may not have fully identified with what was going on around them, or generally that was just a life path that they chose at the time. And I found myself when I was a bit younger being quite judgmental of everybody. It's like, oh yeah, this guy's got too much money, doesn't know what to do with it. This guy says he's a gangster, but if you meet some of my friends, they're more gangster. Oh, this person in the church says they're Christian, but I've seen them flat out on the floor, from drinking too much. And it just became a thing where it was like, if we live our lives like this, we're always going to find something to divorce our relationship with someone else. For example, I have loads of good friends. They're terrible at if I compare my friends, some people are terrible at some things that people are really good at. Yes, we would expect that. That's a normal thing. But what you then happens is, oh, this person's never on time. Okay, but you knew that. If you've been friends with someone more than a few months, you know who's going to be on time and who's not going to be on time. The difference is the way that you perceive it and what you do with that information. And we say that if someone does something over and over again and expects, different outcomes, that's the definition of insanity. But we do it all the time. we try to change people, we try to mold people into what we want them to be. And I kind of got fed up with that route. So, as I started to look into people, I started to think, well, okay, well, let's stop bringing the negatives to the forefront. How about we bring some positives to the forefront? So what is it that this person, is good at, and that became a conversation with myself in terms of just bettering and uplifting myself. Because sometimes you can get caught in a rut where you're like, well, this person doesn't do this for me, that person doesn't do this for me, I'm kind of all alone. And that's a terrible place to be in. Why would you want to be all alone? The world is full of so many amazing people. And sometimes we don't even realize that we've only just looked in our country. The web has made it so, the internet has made it so easily to access other people. And people want to be accessed, especially now more than ever. When you speak to people about social media, it's about who's got 1,000 or 1,000,000 followers, and you can't swipe up unless you get to 3,000 followers. So everybody wants that. Who doesn't want ease of access? If we all followed each other, would there be a problem? But we scroll through people's timelines and act like we're purchasing something when we like something on their page, and it's like, oh, this person's not worthy of my like. Here I am, Zeus of Olympus, scrolling through, going through and being like, well, yeah, not him. She can have a like today. Not her. He can have a like today. And I'm like, well, what does that do for anybody? And so I just became this kind of person. And in terms of your question of, how to discern online, I think just do what makes you happy. So often we're like, oh, I won't do this because I'll be judged for it. And me and Sammy went through that kind of stage with podcasting, which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit later, where we had to go through our own growth and be like, yeah, we talk crazy on our podcast. For anyone who listens, that's what we do. And I was like, oh, you got a job. What's going to happen when people start listening? And I was like, well, I don't care. This is what makes me happy. This is my freedom of expression. And I'm willing to challenge someone on an intellectual level about why you think that I can't speak freely on a platform that you never created. And it's almost like knowing your worth as well, understanding who you are and what it is that makes you you. And I'm an extremely hard worker, and I don't say that lightly. People who know me know that if necessary, I'll put in the hours. I'm an insomniac. I hate sleep, which is another point that people find really weird about me. As long as I get about 4 to 5 hours sleep, I'm pretty much straight. But most of the time, if I can avoid sleep, I think it's a waste of time. I wouldn't do it if my body didn't require it, and so I'm just one of those people. It's like, well, let's focus on making ourselves better. And as we focus on making ourselves better, let's uplift other people, because everybody does wrong and everyone can change. So, yeah.
Yeah, nice, man. Yeah, and as you were just saying that triggered something in me, which was like what actually like will draw you to a person? Because you mentioned there's so many different people, and you're on your Mount Olympus and you're flicking through, and it's like, this person, not this person, whatever. Do either of you have like I don't know, have noticed in your own selves like a pattern that you get drawn to in certain types of people that you're like, I'm really interested for whatever reason what this person's doing, and hopefully it's for the good things rather than the negative, although sometimes we all get drawn into whatever controversy.
For me personally, it's people who are making a commitment to make themselves better, and that's it. They're not necessarily trying to change the world. They're not necessarily trying to start a movement, as it were. But they're just committed to doing daily things that's going to make them more pleasant to be around, more resourceful to be around, and more efficient in the things that they currently do. I'm very, very interested in people like that, because one of our taglines is "Your life matters." Okay, if it matters, then you need to do something about it. It's not a light declaration of like, oh, my life matters. And it's not a gradient scale either. It's like, if your life matters, then it absolutely 100% matters. It's not like, oh, my life matters 50% of the time. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if we say that our lives matter, then it's really important that we start to cultivate lives that we can be proud of. And that requires you to do stuff. So for me, I always look at people who, one, have a very philosophical hunger. That I don't know why, but I've always kind of liked that. I've liked people who can look at stories and see different things. I've liked people who look at questions that are very, very difficult to answer and have a go at trying to create an answer, if only for themselves. I think it's a very necessary thing for people to do. So I'm very, very attracted to those type of people online and in life as well.
Yeah, nice.
I think mine's authenticity. I think generally for me, growing up, as I said, I went through loads of different phases of life and met loads of amazing people. And the thing that always struck out to me is, okay, if this is you, then show the world that this is you. And I think that's part of our tagline in terms of, your life matters. It's not going to matter to every single person under the sun, but as long as it matters to you and you portray that it matters to you, it's going to matter to somebody else. Nobody likes someone who's kind of like so unsure. And, imagine your phone rang 100 times a day and it was your friend saying, I'm not really sure about this, man. I just wanted to check something out with you. And you're like, you just checked something out with me. And like, no, but I just wasn't sure. I just wanted to check. And you're like, are you trying to be me or are you trying to be yourself? Where does your advice kind of come from? Where does your self-confidence come from? Sometimes we just have to kind of take that leap of faith and say, this is who I am. This is what I do. There's millions of people online who have literally been upheld by society by just telling the truth and just saying, well, if you accept me for this, you accept me. And if you don't, you don't. Isn't that the essence of marketing? It's just wanting to find out who a person actually is. And I suppose for me, it's always been that. I don't care who you are, what you talk about, all the rest of it. Just when you present as yourself, in its entirety. And I think that's where I learned to pick elements of people because, I can't judge someone for being something that I don't resonate with or something that I don't relate to, as long as that was what you had going through your life, and who you are, and you're developing off of that. I can take something from it, and so, yeah.
Yeah. And it's nice combining those two because then it's sort of, that's good advice for someone who's just using social media for the first time or like trying to, I guess, market themselves. Be authentic, and then you'll get feedback from people no matter what, and then you can use that to improve yourself because we're not all born great actors or born at the top. That's all we all see, but those people got there through that same process. Be authentic, you get some feedback, and then you improve on that.
I mean, loads of actors have been scouted just walking down the street. They had no acting experience whatsoever. I'm sure Sammy could list a few because, he remembers names a little bit better than me. But, they were just doing their thing. And someone was like, you know what? You would look good in front of a camera. And then thus began their acting career,
But they actually had to, sorry to cut you off, but then they actually had to do the work. So Al Pacino's one and Will Smith, I know, is another one. When he started The Fresh Prince, he couldn't act. He had no acting background whatsoever. But he has turned into one of the most versatile actors ever. He can do comedies. He can do like really sad films. He could do happy films. He could do inspirational films. And that's
action films, everything.
Action films, everything. And you believe it. Biopics. And it's just because he was committed to doing the work. So sometimes an opportunity might come your way, but you have to actually do the work.
Yeah, nice. Man, that's some great info there, and I'm definitely gonna have a re-listen to this and try and distill some of the wisdom I'm getting here from the family. There's a bit of a change of topic here, and I guess one of the reasons I want to talk about this was just because on this topic, you guys make like the most sense and the most reasonable, and that's just, I guess, we're in 2020 and racism is like a huge issue, especially with the Black Lives Matters and whatnot. And it's funny, like, I think the more reasonable and rational you guys are, the more you'll have to talk about it because people want to know, which is, it's not the best of things because you don't particularly want to talk about it all the time.
Right.
But one of the problems I have with it is like the discussion's always focused on like the real short term, the real, we need to change this, we need to change this. And I don't hear a lot of the end goal. What's sort of like a world where we've, if not solved the problem, at least it's like, way down on the list of priorities. Do you guys have a vision or a thought of what that would sort of look like?
So firstly, I don't do utopias. And I think that a lot of the time people are sold utopias. So for this moment in particular, Black people are being sold a utopian view of what racism would look like if everybody banded together and stuff like that. You look through the entire history of human beings, like we don't get along. Like we just don't get along in places where people are the same color. It's like a class issue, like you can't marry him. He's a peasant.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that, you feel what I'm saying? So we always have this contention. Now, am I saying that because of that, we shouldn't try? No, that's not what I'm saying. But in my view, the thing that makes the most sense based on everything I've listened to, everything I've read, is that people are treated as an individual. I think that's massive. And I understand that we are social beings, but we are starting to label, like people look at me like, right, he's Black, he's male. And they start to get confused because already that's a dichotomy, right? Because Black people are following the current narrative. Black people are oppressed and stuff like that. But according to feminism, oh, well, he's a man. And so how much suffering does this equation produce?
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Where it's like, if you take me as an individual and you sit down and you say, right, Sam, what are you like? And then you form a basis or you form an idea around that person. It's hard to do because we don't always know, right? And if you're a lady and, you're walking in a street and you see 4 hooded men, you might not get robbed, but you might, and so you have to make a decision. And if you want to cross the road or you want to get somebody to accompany you across the road, well, you're more than justified in doing that. I think everything's been really politicized and everything's been like, okay, all Black people are this and all white people are this. And I don't know. It's really, really hard for me to have a future projection about how this is going to look because I don't know. But what I do think is that there needs to be less of this pack mentality and we need to start looking at people like, the individuals that they are, and that certain individuals contribute. The people who contribute the best or the most, those are the people we should look to and uplift. And it should not be about their color. One thing I have to say about the race dispute is that I feel as a Black person, any improvements that we decide to make as Black people shouldn't be impeded. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we get to say, like, we are the new power. What we said, so what we're seeing now is like, we don't want certain people to play this role. We don't want this. We don't want that. And I think it shouldn't be about what you want. First off, it's like, what can you contribute? Are you a good actor? Yes. Then are you a Black actor? Yes. Then you shouldn't be impeded for being Black, but you shouldn't be chosen because you're Black. Unless the movie dictates. You should be chosen because you're a damn good actor. And the same goes for white, Chinese, Japanese, everyone. So for me, that's what it would look like. But again, that looks like a utopia. And I'm not convinced that something like that is, even close to happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Sammy kind of hit the nail on the head. I think that we have to be careful, and I know that some people just don't care, but I think we need to be careful about role reversal. you know, where it becomes, okay, well, let's give black people everything that they want and marginalize everybody else. And that's not me saying that I don't stand up for black people. I think that when we have an educated discussion about kind of what is seen, you have to go kind of like for like, you know, people are in a growing process, you know, and you cannot judge people for things that you have done that makes you a hypocrite. So, for example, if, you know, part of strengthening the mind and a community, people went down smashing down things, okay, we know that's not acceptable, but we know it happened vice versa. You need to have an acknowledgement of that, at least, you know, for me, in terms of, if we're going to grow, you know, as people, then you have to acknowledge that someone is going through a process. And in terms of that process, the outcome of a process is learning, you know. And I've always had that kind of mentality. So I find it really hard when, for example, people say things like, oh, well, you know, these black youths ran into a shop and robbed everything. Well, okay, what kind of environment did they grow up in? Did you close down all their youth centers? You know, is there public funding for their schools? Who is their role models, as we spoke about in the beginning? You know, we throw people into, and this is not just about, you know, kind of black people, it's about, you know, all people, because some, you know, white people grow up in very deprived areas around black kids, you know, black families, and they become immersed in the culture, you know, and that's not a negative culture. You know, they may, you know, learn to cook like, you know, black people do. You don't, there's many disparities. So, you know, they may learn to cook like Caribbeans, they may learn to cook like Africans. They may then open a shop. You know, they shouldn't be marginalized for opening a shop with that kind of cuisine. Does, as Sammy said, does the cuisine taste good? You know, yeah, it does. All right, this is one of my new favorite shops. You know, and I think it's about learning and about, you know, embracing culture. And I think the reason why black people feel so marginalized is they feel that nobody ever embraced their culture, and then it became a kind of cool culture. Then lots of money was siphoned off the culture, but they never got anything. So in terms of things like the world debt, you know, we know that the world debt is never going to be cleared. You know, it's just something that, you know, countries who are less developed is not the correct term, but, you know, who are reaching the state of the Western world, you know, they go through a learning process. The Western world has been through its own learning process. So, for example, veganism is very much like the Caribbean ITIL living, which has been going on for years and years and years. If there wasn't that level of oppression, maybe this thing would have come into, you know, fruition sooner. We've seen, you know, the fast food world dominate a lot of countries, you know, that are not in the Western world because of the way that the Western world think. And you see the Western world reverting back to veg, you know, fruit and veg, and living off the land. And it's kind of like, as I feel, as ethnic minorities, we need to just figure out what our road is, you know, where we want to go as individuals, where we want to go as a community. And that should be kind of bar thing, just like there would be many things, you know, in terms of culture that I may not understand about white British people, white people from, you know, a different country. And if I sit with them, I would learn, you know, and I can discern what I want to discern, and I can take with me what I want to take with me. It makes me a better person. I went to a university in the University of Portsmouth. Strangest experience of my life. You know, I'm a urban child, you know, growing up in Fulton Heath. All my friends, well, most of my friends were black, and the ones who weren't black, you know, had some sort of level of understanding of the culture of black people. And some of them, you know, felt like it was part of their culture because, again, they grew up in that environment, and some of them didn't. You know, they knew that this wasn't their culture. They grew up in another culture, and they much rather preferred their culture. But when I went to Portsmouth, I found people who were so different. So I found people who had money, were white, and still sold drugs. And I was like, help me understand this. Yeah. Because where I'm from, people sell drugs because they don't have any money. They just, you know, one of my friends, you know, spoke about his difficulties and, you know, why he went into a certain life. And he was like, he's definitely out of the life now. But it started, when he walked in one day and there's no electricity, and his mom didn't have money. Now, when we have when we have political discussions and we have debates about what is right and what is wrong in terms of ethics, was it wrong that he started something to put electric? Who else is going to put electricity in his meter?
Yeah.
And you have kind of hard debates like this, and I'm not saying that everybody should understand them. I'm definitely not saying that what happens as a result of it or consequence of it is entirely right. But then, did you take the time to understand the mindset? Similarly, that doesn't just happen in ethnic minorities, as I said at the beginning. It happens all across the world. Most countries have poor people. Okay, then you have relative poverty, but most places do have poor parts of that area. And it's about understanding that, that lifestyle to some degree, and saying, well, I can understand. I may not be able to totally relate, but where does this put me in terms of my mind and my thinking? And I think that in terms of, if we're looking at, as Sammy said, I don't ever think there'll be a utopia. Just let me sit in my lane and do my thing. And if you want to learn, I should be open enough as someone who's teaching to say, you know what, come and experience this. I didn't know what it was like to go to cottages when I spent a lot of time in my local area. We would just about go to the chicken shop. And especially my mum, she's African. She used to try and keep us in the house as much as possible. I was a rebel. I used to jump fences and do all sorts of things. And then someone took me to a cottage. And the first cottage that I went to, or was it the second? The guy was a turtle breeder. And he had acres of land and there's turtles walking around. I was thinking, what the hell is this? He had a hot tub outside, and the rooms were amazing. And, obviously we had to pay for the, experience. But I was like, oh, there's something outside of, this thing that is your area and your postcode. It's like, oh, so I can actually own one of these. I can be the owner of a property, because he's no different from me. He probably just worked hard. Yes, some people, kind of roller skate through life, they're given certain things, but I never take that for granted. Do you know how hard it is to maintain a business? It doesn't matter if you're given 100 grand. If you blow it all, that's the business done. If you take all the equity out of a property, then there's no more equity in the property to take. You have to understand this. So when people are like, oh yeah, this person was given a silver spoon, I'm like, well, how much of a silver spoon was it? A lot of us would like to be given $1 million. I don't know whether I could stay in £1 million without an advisor, a financial advisor. I would buy everything under the sun. Anything that I wanted and I saw, I would buy it. Why not? I like it. And so I have much more complex debates than just your skin color and what you feel that you've experienced. What you've experienced is very important because it teaches people a vital lesson. But what you can teach other people is much more important than that. I have a problem with people who won't take the time to listen. I don't have a problem with the people who have a viewpoint. Me and Sammy often say, if you're a racist, just tell me you're a racist and stay clear of me. No issue. You're just someone who's got this view and mentality. You may have friends who've got that view and mentality. If you don't persecute me, for what I've done and try and lynch me, I couldn't care less. You've chosen your lane in life and I've chosen mine. And so I think that when we're looking at what we want at the end of it, well, it's just equal treatment. I want everybody to be treated like a human. I don't want, other people to regress in time and be treated as slaves as I was because, I want payback or, some sort of reparation for what happened to my ancestors. 9 times out of 10, if you speak to people, and a lot of Black people as well, some of them don't even really know. They know that they're oppressed and they know what they experience today, but they will never know what it's like to be beaten in a cotton field, their ancestors were. But you want everything that you can get because your ancestors were treated this way. Okay, well, let's look at your life. Do you have access to education? Yes. Did you choose not to go to education? Yes. Well, that's more than some people had.
Yeah.
They didn't have the choice. So
yeah. There's I think just sort of distilling what you both said there was 2 things. One was we're in this weird state where you need to be able to hold two competing views at the same time. So like in this case, it would be something along the lines of, we'd probably want it to be a good thing where if someone achieved like a, amazing feat, and then, we judge them based on their skin color, it's like the same importance as their hair color, right? It's just, it'd be insane to be, going crazy about people who've became the president of the United States because they had red hair, for example. Like, it's like, who gives a shit? But then also you want to sort of promote, I guess, that those individual groups as well, where it's like, maybe they have had a really rough time over the past, 10, 50, 100, keep going back and back. And humans are really bad at holding those two things together, which gets onto what you were saying, Sammy, which is, when you get fed that one utopia, that one idea of like, yes, this is the thing that's going to make everything better. Equal representation everywhere. This is what's going to, fix it. It's, it usually ends up pretty poorly. If you look at history and all the bad shit that's happened, that's what tends to happen. So it's like, my co-host has a phrase that he uses pretty often, which is strong views held loosely. So, you can have strong opinions on stuff, but, leave that wiggle room for, I guess, that other opinion, that other idea to enter as well.
Yeah, because I'm not married to my viewpoints. I think if there's a better viewpoint out there, I want to have it because I'm in search of being a more complete person so I can be useful to people within my vicinity, maybe more, because I have a podcast show, but at least to my family members, to my, my daughter, to my friends, if having a better viewpoint can allow me to advise them better, can allow me to be a better person around them, then I don't think that's a bad thing. And I don't have the time to worry about all of this stuff. That's just me. I've been afforded a very fortunate life. I've never been to prison. I was able to go through the education system. My parents instilled hard work and all of those things. They were not drug addicts or alcoholics. We were not by any means impoverished. So I get that I come from a specific grouping that may not be able to identify and certainly don't speak for everyone. I think that's another thing you have to be careful of, because once you go and you make a statement, sometimes it's like, yes, he speaks for the entire Black population. It's like, how could I possibly do that? It doesn't make any sense for me to do that. All I can speak about is my experiences and my thoughts on it. And if it resonates with certain people, then that's fine. But I don't speak for I can't speak for everyone. We all come from different places, even though we have the same skin color. I can't play basketball, but the narrative is like, if you're Black, you're athletically gifted. It's like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And that other point is really good as well. The individual, treating people as individuals and not getting too stuck in the group think. Judging, especially I think viewing yourself as solely part of groups, that tends to go awry in the sense that your identity is then connected to that group. So any attack on the group is an attack on you, like in a personal front. Yeah, cool. Awesome. That was good. That was useful. I was afraid I was going to say something really stupid, but I managed to avoid it. The last thing I really wanted to talk to you guys about was the family podcast, and it's come up, basically in both of the things we mentioned with role models. You were talking about your mom, and even just then, I guess, starting of the podcast and whatnot. So the roots of the family podcast, we talked a little about it, a bit about it before, but what, I guess, like in a condensed version, why was it that you felt like the need to, well, one, interact with each other all the time, but then also, have that emphasis on the family?
I missed him. I moved out of a flat that we were sharing because I got married and found out that my wife was pregnant, not me. And so we decided to move. And then obviously Don is somebody that I've grown up around. 90% of our lives are together, you know, and so it's kind of like we were talking, but we were having these long, sprawling conversations. And I was like, why don't we do a podcast and like talk just to catch up? At least then it's dedicated time where we actually physically meet up. At first, it wasn't like that because we did it over Skype. Then we realized, it's not really the best thing to do. And so we actually got together, sat down, and we had protected time, and the family was born. And we had a lot of different ideologies. And I think the further you go back on the Instagram, you can see we had this kind of like raise your shield thing, which is still important. But the one constant has been, you know, that no Cain and Abel thing. And I think that is the ethos of the family. You're like, if you stay together, you won't, not only, how am I going to say this? So for me, when I look at the Cain and Abel story, it isn't just a story of betrayal. Like it's a story of self-sabotage, because you don't realize that other people help orientate you in the world. So because Abel was able to make good sacrifices and Cain killed him off before Abel could teach him how to make good sacrifices, he didn't make good sacrifices and he ended up lost.
Yep.
And so that's the mythology of that tale to me. Now, so for me, it's very important that, one, I stay connected to Don, because not only is Don my brother, but he's somebody that I value. As if we weren't brothers, the likelihood of us as adults being friends is highly likely. And so I want to have that person around, not all the time, but, you know, enough to enrich my life.
Yeah.
And so that's how the podcast started. And that's the ethos that we have going forward. And of course, it's called the family because we're blood brothers. But also, you know, we have friends that we've had come on the show. And I was very deliberate in not running off to try and find like local celebrities and all of this stuff. It was like, I'm going to start with my friends first, because they're my friends for a reason. And if I can talk to anybody about anything, it should be my friends. And so that's how it started.
But that's how family kind of works. And I think I've always had this ethos that we kind of self-sabotage, similar to, you know, the Cain and Abel story. Because actually, what does a famous person have to do with you? You know, like, you may, as we spoke about role models, you may see them as a role model, or you may pick up elements of their life. But what do they really have to do with you? Well, nothing at all. You know, you cannot talk about a relationship that you have with that person. You can talk about things that you feel resonate with yourself. You may be able to have conversations about, you know, their life story and how you may wish that you get to where they get to. But I think that in general, there's not really much. I can talk about so much with my friends, you know, they're so multifaceted. And this similar with, you know, Sammy, like, there was a time where me and Sammy just used to fight all the time, you know, and that's not because we didn't like each other. That's because we was growing, you know, and very similar to plants, you know, if you go to a forest, you see that some plants are taller than others. You know, they had to fight for the light that they got, you know, and then suddenly you realize, actually, well, I'm a plant within my own being, whether short or whether, you know, big and tall, or whether I developed into a tree. You know, there's something about it. I remember going to Ghana and going to the botanical gardens, and there was this plant. It was really small, like it was almost like a shrub, and you touched it and it just closed up. And then when you walked past it, it would just open up again. It was like a protective mechanism. And that plant isn't as big as an oak tree, you know, but still it had its purpose within this botanical garden. And in fact, I was fascinated by it. And most people would be, you know, you touch a plant and it just goes into this kind of shell. There's a weird thing that happens to the plant, you know, but if that plant decided that it wanted to be an oak tree, it wouldn't get very far. And I suppose when me and Sammy kind of just got speaking, once we were old enough to rationalize our thoughts and have discussions, you know, we found that we were very similar but very different. And the one thing is that we learn from each other. You know, we're open about the situation. We debate about things, yes, but we don't fully argue about stuff. You know, we have rational conversations about them. There became a time where I wasn't scared to admit, you know, Sam was gymming crazy, he was massive. You know, I wasn't scared to admit that Sam could beat me up. You know, well, who cares? You know, yes, I may get the upper hand in a different way, you know, in a fight against Sammy. But, you know, at the end of the day, nobody really knows what happens. You know, if you watch UFC or you watch boxing, you know, sometimes, or even if you watch football, sometimes you have a team down to win. In terms of their aesthetic, they look aesthetically better. In terms of the players that they've got, you know, you expect them to do the job. And then they lose. And you're like, what the hell, man? How did you lose? You spent all this money on great players. The chemistry's insane. You lost to this rubbish team, you know, but this is the way that life goes. You know, sometimes you can have the biggest, the baddest person in the area, and they may be defeated by the smallest person in the area, you know, but what it is about knowledge, you know. Someone who understands the area may be better at, you know, if a war was to happen in any sense, you know, whether that's, you know, the kind of Greek mythology wars or whether that's, you know, turf wars, they may be better placed to defend their fort. Well, why? Because they have an understanding of the area. They know the places that you don't know. And so I found that in kind of Sammy. I was like, well, Sammy understands things that I just don't understand. I'm not someone who is a vivid reader. Like, I can't name thousands of books off the top of my head. You know, I can't talk about things that I've read in books. I'm getting better at reading because, you know, I've become a podcaster, you know, to some degree. But sometimes me and Sammy have conversations like, oh, that's crazy. You read that? Yeah. And you interpreted it like that? Yeah. And that's insane, you know? And so we kind of have that kind of relationship and kind of chemistry. And as Sammy said, I don't think it's necessarily just always because we're brothers. I think that has made it stronger and made it more desirable to other people to see how two brothers, you know, who lived in the same household are so different. But I do think, you know, we've opened up our minds to say, well, I can learn off you and we can have good debates together. And the fact that we're brothers is a bonus, so we understand certain things. So like when I say to Sam, oh, do you remember when like mum used to make us cultural dishes like fufu and we just used to roll it up in tissue and throw it in the bin because we were tired of eating it and we didn't like it very much. Sammy can laugh about it. We understand, you know, that kind of journey together. And so, yeah, we've just kind of used our platform to just show people what life is like through our eyes.
Yeah, and it's really great because you can see it from the first episodes, like just how different you two are, and you know, just the role models you mentioned in those first episodes, and your thoughts and the way you talk. Yeah, you definitely want that. I can see why that no Cain and Abel, I guess, theme has gone throughout so many of your podcasts, and I guess like the whole podcast. Also, watch out, Sammy. It sounded like you're about to get your ass kicked or something like that. So,
yeah, well, you know, I've packed on a few pounds since getting married, man. It's not good for your physique. It's a trap.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to actually touch on as well was I just finished reading the Odyssey, and in it, Odysseus has this like intense desire, this longing to come to home, and I wanted to, I guess, ask both of you as well. Like, do you feel that in your lives as well? I mean, because you've your heritage is from Ghana. Do you have like a call towards home there, or is home more towards you in England where you grew up? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think as I've got older, the desire to go back to Ghana in some capacity has intensified. I just think it's very strange because when I went there the first time I was a kid, and I was like, I fucking hate it here. Like, I don't understand why mom and dad are so intent on coming back to this place. Yeah. I don't understand it at all. And then I went very recently, about 4 years ago. And there was a real, like, me and Don are like quite laid back. And sometimes it's hard to see where that comes from because London is so fast. And then seeing the old ladies like in Ghana just walking in the sun, just blissfully aware of everything. It's like, this is the reason. Like, this is why I am the way that I am, to some degree. And it was kind of like, yeah, like, so it's like having a puzzle and you're searching everywhere for the last couple of pieces, and you have to go outside of the room that you actually built the puzzle to find the other pieces.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's kind of what's happened as I've grown older, and it just appeals to me. The sunshine's there, slower pace of life that's geared towards, I wouldn't say older people, but definitely if you're an older person, you know, having to try and get on the bus with like, you know, 150, 200 different people who are all trying to get to work and all in a rush and also able-bodied. It makes sense to me. And so as I've grown up, I have had the desire to like set roots and go down. I mean, if not permanently, then for certain periods of time within the year, definitely. That's been a big thing for me growing up. Yeah.
I'm a nomad. I want to go everywhere. I mean, to be honest, I love Ghana. I went 2 years ago, probably now. And it's amazing to see the lifestyle over there. I mean, I don't want to ruin the episode if you haven't seen the podcast, but you know, I had some crazy, I had some crazy ordeals in Ghana myself. And there's lots of learning and lots of teaching there. There's lots of love there. You know, people see you and just like embrace you. But there's also many things that I've got from England. And I see like my parents, for example, and I was like, Mum, like, are you trying to create like England and Ghana? Because you know, Ghana's Ghana and England's England.
Yeah.
You know, and so I value the truths of both places. I think I've always, different to Sammy, I've always said that I could live in Ghana. Like from a very young age, I was like, yeah, I could live here. And Sammy was like, what? And I was like, bro. And he's like, the electricity cuts out. And I'm like, buy a generator. He's like, well, if you don't have money to buy a generator, well, then, you know, deal with the electricity cutting off. It's part of the culture, man. Like embrace what is, you know, what is there. And so I'm someone who wants to experience different things. So I'm never ignorant. I think there's a journey that a person goes through when they're a foreigner in a different country and they can't even get something to eat because, you know, they don't really know how to say it. So they're like, food. And then you're just doing all the gestures and you're looking like a complete idiot, you know? That means that when someone comes to your country and does exactly the same thing, you're not like, oh, for fuck's sake. You're like, yeah, I've been there. No, if you go down here on the left, let me show you. Let me take you to the shop. And you're just insanely grateful for that person who is able to take time out of their day to show you where to get something to eat. You know, something so simple. And so I'm always trying to, I've got a kind of thirst for that. I haven't done as much traveling as I want to, but I've definitely done more traveling than people who are, you know, a little bit less fortunate and haven't been able to travel. But if I could, I would have houses everywhere, man. I would spend, you know, portions of time in different places because I'm like, home is happiness. And I don't believe that you find happiness in just one place, you know. I remember me and Sammy having early conversations about women. And we were like, like all these people like, oh, I'm never going to find someone. You've been 10 minutes down the road, mate. That's your life, you know. You go 10 minutes down the road, you see a few people, and you know nobody's approached you. And for the shy people, you know, nobody's ever approached you and been like, "Oh, I really like you." And for the confident people, nobody's ever kind of grasped onto your humor or you know who you are. Well, do some traveling, go to a different country. You know, there's millions of people in the world. So
I traveled like I've got this big map behind me, which is when I was preparing to go travel across South America. And I have been there, experienced those same things, not being able to speak the language, not being able to do do I guess the normal everyday life stuff. And that sort of made me what made me think about home a lot, which was it's just so much easier. It's so much easier knowing the language, not having to build up that friend group, having your your family especially with you. And it's that's like one of the things I got out of traveling. Like, I love it. It's so cool going and doing all that. But for me, it's like, man, home is home, and there's there's a lot of costs and effort that needs to be put in if you were going to like set down roots elsewhere.
It's very interesting because I don't know how relevant this is, but it just the thought occurred to me that when I go to Ghana and I hear the local language, Chi is what it's called, being spoken, like, I hear it as an English person. So it comes out of their mouth, and then in my brain, I have to translate it to English. But I realize that doesn't happen to them. Like, they literally do not know the English equivalent, And so I think what you were saying before is like, whenever you're someplace else, you always have to see things through a filter, if that makes sense. And it's so much harder to do that home is just more appealing.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I think, but I think you have to experience that to know that.
To know it.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that's the key learning from it. For me personally, I want to learn as much as other people's cultures. I want to know what it's like, we don't really have like, so for example, like if you go to, Iceland, we don't have these massive pools that people jump into, these massive springs that there's not many of them in London, if any. And so when you do that and you see all people, like, there's loads of people who be like loads of people in one bath together. That's weird. And then you speak to them and they're like, oh yeah, well, my family grew up bathing together. And you're like, oh, so it's not so weird. You just only want to do it with your family. And, you learn different things about different people and what they're willing to risk in times of hardship. And I know for a lot of people, my friends that I've spoke to who have gone traveling, the life lessons that they've got is insane. And the people that they've met is crazy. I mean, my uni experience was never being in my uni halls alone. There was always people who didn't live there in my uni halls, and not even just in my uni halls. When we moved out and we moved to a university accommodation, I remember I got a really good friend, Rodrigo. Rodrigo barely spoke English, when he came to Portsmouth, and my friends were kind of teaching him, saying, oh, this is this. We're gonna go out to a club. Like, do you want to come? And, Rodrigo kind of started to pick up the English language, a little bit. And he's moved back to Brazil. We have a friend for life. We can call him up and be like, yo, Rodrigo, like, we're going to pull up in Brazil. And he'll be like, yeah, I know some people, you can stay here. And that's not something that you normally have. You have a direct link into another country. So, yeah, man, I think it's really important for people to kind of get out of their comfort zone. Like, even if there's so many different places you can go. Like, even if you can't get out of a country, like even going to the countryside is very different from being in the city. So
one of the things I've actually been saying during this coronavirus time is you're not going to be able to travel, and who knows when it's all going to open up back again. But one of the things you can do now is, no matter where you are, wherever you want to go in the world, like, pick a destination. There's going to be someone from that country living within 20 kilometers of you, most likely. And so it's possible to find those people, and you have to use a bit of invention, like stalking on Facebook or asking around or going to like the Colombian restaurant and then talking to the waiting staff there, because Colombians are going to come in and stuff. But you can sort of like prepare for the travel in the future right now by making those friends, by meeting those Rodrigos, and then you've got those contacts in Brazil.
Definitely.
Very true.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's all I really wanted to talk with you guys about. And I'm so appreciative of your time, and especially with the time difference and whatnot. Yeah. Do you guys want to plug your show a little bit, direct people where they can interact with you and find you best?
Sure. So, we're called The Family Podcast. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. a few others, but mainly those two. And you can follow us on Instagram at The Family Podcast, or on Twitter at The Family Pod. Instagram's the best because I'm most active on that. I don't like really getting drawn into the verbal sparring that is Twitter.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do the whole Instagram thing. So yeah, we're always looking to have more conversations with people. We're always looking to be inspired, you know, because like we say, your life matters and that. So yeah, and thank you as well for, taking the time out and giving us the platform. We really appreciate.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. And yeah, I'll just give a personal recommendation. Like, it's sort of hard through Zoom and Skype and these ones to really get, you know, the full conversation. And you know, purposefully, it's sort of like it's not so much a conversation. It's like each person gets their turn to talk. But man, when you guys are in the room together and the sparks are flying, you're talking shit. Like that's the peak of podcasting for me. So, you know, even if you go back to like your first ones when the audio is a little bit scratchy, you know, you're not exactly sure what you're doing. Like you can still see the gems from there, like the startings of the family podcast. And man, yeah, it's making me want to like listen to every episode. And I mentioned already, like, God damn, I don't have time to go through like your 50 plus hours of content, but you know, I'll probably make the time.
It's like, you know, it's like a Costa coffee. Like some days you go in there and you want it, and some days you walk past it. And that's how we view the podcast. Like, you know, whenever you want to come and catch up with the family, we're here, man.
We're here,
you know,
we're about.
But if you want to skip by it for the week, like, okay, you can do that too. You have my blessing.
Awesome. All right, thanks so much, Sammy, Don. Like, pleasure having you on. And yeah, let's do this again sometime. And
absolutely,
hell, man, it'd be awesome to do this in the future. Like looking far out, face to face. But who knows? Who knows what will happen?
Yeah, man. We'll speak it into existence. It's going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't believe that much in the manifestations and whatnot, but you know, let's give it a try.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, guys.
No worries.
Cheers.
Take care.